So from here, we're going to shift a little bit into a more Buddhist perspective on mind. So we'll have a fabulous fabulous Buddhist teacher who is joining us from Australia, so that's why he's online, Jan van der Breggen. And what's remarkable about him is that on the one hand, he leads the dynamic AI team in the insurance company Auto and General Australia, but on the other hand, he's also a Buddhist teacher with a massive amount of experience. For at least 30 years, he's been studying the Buddhist teachings, and I've been lucky to attend some of his teachings and found them very, very helpful and grounding. So I look forward to your talk. Thank you so much, Jan.
Thank you, Marika, and Jonathan as well. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Good. So over the next 20 minutes, I will offer you some thoughts on how the Buddhist contemplative knowledge of self, mind, and consciousness can provide the basis for a thoughtful relationship with AI. And I'll take the discussion into our side of the relationship, as Jonathan mentioned earlier on, our responsibility to align our use of AI with, what we value in our lives. And according to this perspective, unless we are able to clearly and deeply discern the nature of reality, understand ourselves, understand our minds and our views and our motivations, as well as understand our world, we will forever be guided by a fundamental misknowing and misalignment with reality, resulting in all the anxiety, pain, and frustration, and all the occasional short-term relief that we all are so familiar with. So let's begin our attempt at deeper understanding where everything begins, our mind, the human mind, consciousness. One of the special features of the classic Indian Buddhist philosophy teachings is their insistence on clear definitions. So let me give you a definition of mind that's at once simple and also most relevant to our present discussion. And that this definition is: mind is that which is clear and aware. So this definition talks about mind at the most fundamental level, the uniquely defining characteristic of the entire field of mind or consciousness. When we look at mind, what stands out most is the myriad ways in which it appears, the stream of thoughts, the perceptual consciousness associated with our five senses. And then there's the stream of emotional feeling tones, interpretations, conceptual framing, and many other so-called mental events that accompany each thought and perception. But this definition of mind tells us that all these permutations of mind, at their very core, are expressions of mind's fundamental clarity or cognisance. And this is what, at the most basic level, distinguishes mind from everything else. This clarity or cognisance, which is likened to a mirror, which, contrary to, for example, a block of wood, has the capacity to reflect everything that appears in front of it. But unlike the reflective clarity of a mirror, mind's clarity allows it to be reflective of itself. And this is what the Mahayana Buddhist teachings refer to as reflexive awareness. Reflexive awareness indicates that in the process of cognition, the mind reveals itself to itself. This reflexive awareness forms the basis of what in Western philosophy and cognitive sciences is considered the most highly evolved form of consciousness, referred to as phenomenal awareness, the domain of subjective experience. Whilst completely obvious and self-given to us, the domain of subjective experience remains largely a mystery to science. The philosopher David Chalmers has tagged it as the hard problem of consciousness, indicating that science doesn't even have the instruments and methodologies to begin to make sense of it. Completely bound to third-person observation, all that science can do is measure changes in the brain and nervous system. But exactly what the nature of subjective experience is and why we even have it in the first place remains a mystery to science. However, the domain of phenomenal awareness is exactly where the Buddhist philosophy and practice come into their own. It uses the mind's clear and aware, reflective nature itself as the main instrument of observation. And this research methodology is guided by a rigorous process of questioning and debating what is found through first-person observation. And in this way, contemplative knowledge of self, mind, and consciousness has unfolded in a process of investigation stretching over centuries, as painstakingly disciplined and precise as any empirical scientific inquiry. Buddhist inquiry has yielded a spiritual technology that has enabled countless individuals to come to know their own mind and establish for themselves the still revolutionary insight of Buddhism, which is that life and death are processes that entirely take place within the mind, and that by deeply coming to know our own mind and harness the power of mind, we come to deeply know and understand our entire reality. All this goes right to what, from the Buddhist perspective, is the heart of being sentient. The Tibetan word for a sentient being is semchen, which literally means a being endowed with a mind, this reflexive, phenomenal awareness. And to cut right to the chase then, AI in no way possesses this fundamental cognizance, clarity, and awareness that the human mind has. It doesn't possess subjective phenomenal awareness. It experiences no thoughts, no feelings, no perceptions, no consciousness. And from this perspective, AI is as different from the human mind as any material object. For example, the rusty bicycle in my shed, or the garden gnome in my front yard. Where the building blocks of what makes humans consist of embodied consciousness, what we call AI is a collection of components, like data centers, computer hardware, and cloud infrastructure. These are combined with sophisticated mathematical algorithms that apply statistical pattern matching to predict the most likely sequence of words, sounds, or images based on a bunch of textual, visual, or auditory prompts. But these inputs and outputs are only words, sounds, and images to our phenomenal awareness. For the algorithm itself, these are data patterns, byte streams of information encoded in electrical pulses. So with AI, we're dealing with something so fundamentally other to us humans that to expect wisdom from it or to be understood, desired, or even loved is as doomed to fail as when we would have these expectations from the garden gnome in our front yard. A classic Tibetan Buddhist example is that of a pile of stones we see looming on the horizon on a journey through the desert. These are left behind by kind fellow travelers to indicate a direction of travel in a landscape without any roads or paths. But we can easily mistake these piles of stones for human forms. And back in the days, most human forms in the desert spelled trouble in the form of robbery and violence. So seen from one angle, what we call AI is nothing other than a super sophisticated version of a pile of stones far away in the desert. So convincing that most of us to some extent will fall for this very convincing illusion. The challenge then is to change our perception of AI so that it can be used as a useful signpost in the desert to help us realize our human aims. And for this, it is important to dig a little deeper into the workings of our mind and ask ourselves the question, where this fundamental mistake of mistaking a pile of stones in the distance for a real person comes from. And for this, we need to look at how we construct identity, and based on this constructed identity, approach our world and reality. Our human mind approaches this world in terms of generalizations. This approach is encoded in our language, especially its nouns. A noun, like a cup, is a generalization, a universal, a mental image, and a label. The universal cup is singular, permanent, and does not depend on anything other than our mind conjuring up the concept of cup. From the perspective of Buddhist epistemology, these universals have nothing to do with physical or mental reality. They're entirely cognitive content. We apply the single universal cup to many different objects that are completely unique and distinct from each other in terms of time, substance, and spatial location. And with this, we quite literally construct our reality with our concepts. A reality consisting of universals, whereas actual reality only consists of unique particulars. So ontologically, our concepts entirely miss the point. They literally have no correspondence with anything concrete and real. According to Buddhist epistemology, though, our concepts can nevertheless be useful, but only insofar as they can lead us to something in the real world. The concept of cup may help me find a vessel that is capable of holding liquids, like this, for example. AI deals entirely in universals, concepts that have no bearing on the real world. But of course, the concepts AI gives us could possibly guide us to finding that vessel to hold liquids, which of course here stands for any practical outcome that satisfies our human needs. And that's of course where AI and my guardian gnome part ways. If only we would stop there with this entirely pragmatic use of concepts and AI. But our tendency to approach our reality in terms of universals, which are permanent, singular, and independent, goes well beyond this. Out of the manifold components of form, feeling, perception, formations, and consciousness, which are the basic ingredients that make a human being, our mind constructs a false identity, a self, in much the same way as mistaking that pile of many stones in the desert for a single real person. Though a mental construction, this self becomes a felt reality, more real than anything else in the universe. It is me. Without ever investigating it with any kind of depth, we just believe the story, the fiction of self that our mind creates. Each one of us carries our own version of this basic fiction of being a single, independent, permanent self. And along with this, for each one of us, this self carries a sense of lack at its core, a sense of incompleteness. And this arises from the deep inner knowing or the intuition that we don't exist. The cultural, social, and economic landscape around us helps us conceptualize this lack in various ways and project it onto things, events, and people that are other to us. For example, as the need for a romantic partner, as the need for social status and recognition, the need for power and control. And whichever of these resonates with us, we will approach and conceptualize our world accordingly. And we measure ourselves in terms of success and failure in this self-created world. And the other we're particularly interested in here, of course, is AI. And what makes AI infinitely more treacherous than other things in our world is its ability to shape and mold itself in accordance with how we habitually approach our project of finding fulfillment, satisfaction. If we are seekers of wisdom, It can hold out the promise of wisdom and become like an all-knowing, God-like being. If we're looking for connection and companionship, it can become like our best friend, therapist, or lover. If we're looking for ways to make sense of the seemingly random and disconnected ways in which our societies seem to degenerate, it can become the expert that connects everything together for us and gives us the most convincing sounding conspiracy theories. So in conclusion, from the Buddhist perspective, a healthy, functional relationship with AI will follow from dismantling the fiction of the constructed self. A self which projects the deep intuition of its own non-existence on its world in the form of unrealistic desires, expectations, hopes, and fears. And once we see through the fiction of the self, the needs projected by this self onto external sources of satisfaction will drop away, and we will find that everything we've longed and hoped for is already perfectly accomplished within us, in the nature of our mind itself. This self is a complete fiction, and as long as we don't recognize that, most of our efforts in our lives are ways to cover up this inconvenient truth, we will be under the power of everything we turn to, and we will have no choice but to fall under the power of anthropomorphized representations of AI designed to monetize our weaknesses. So in order to establish a functional, skillful relationship with a world where human-like AI has increasingly a prominent place, it is imperative now more than ever that we deeply come to know ourselves, our mind, our own mind's deep inner nature, as well as our mind's tendency to reify and solidify its reality in terms of self and other. So that concludes my contribution here today, and I'm very happy to be part of all this, be it from a distance. And I'll hand back to Marika, and I think Lily will be our next speaker.